I have an idea. Let's paint some Stormcast. Welcome back again, my friends. Let us add to the ranks of those holy rolling dudes and dudettes, the Stormcast Eternals. It is my own personal army of choice. Previously, I covered the process for painting up the Liberators. I made a separate video on the freehand shield design. And today I'm picking out the details that make the Sequitors unique. They have a green cloak, a creamy tabard, and a power crystal at their hip. So we'll be detailing just those in this video today. Adding to what we already know, please watch the previous videos if there is something you feel is left off. And I will certainly link those down below for your browsing ease. But without any further ado, I will shut my mouth and let the brush do the talking while I speak. Thanks to a little touch of the airbrush, everything has been given a uniform shadow, but there are some colors, obviously the cream ivory area, that will need a lot of work. Before I get to that, let's start working on the green robes. Let's just pull back a bit of that shadow pass. It's more necessary for the metals and other areas. So I'll be reclaiming a lot of these upward facing angles with a quick pass of that original base coat, Gnarls green from Privateer Press. I want to correct some of these areas right where the cloak is tucking into the belt line. I want that to be nice and bright, as that's where most of my highlights will be ending up. And we'll just quickly keep the brush moving, always sweeping upwards towards the highlights and more exposed areas. I have these kind of larger folds that I'm just sweeping the side of the brush over, just pulling these out. I'm aiming for tabletop quality, so I'm not going to spend an extreme amount of time here. Of course, it's debatable whether you're doing tabletop quality or whatever. I just want to be self-satisfied. So I'm going to try, but not go completely crazy. I'll also want to give this handle a little touch, and kind of want to work a gradient moving upwards. So the brightest area will be right up here at the top of the mace, and we'll have the shadow descend into the palm of the hand. With that airbrush shadow under a slight amount of control, move up to just pure Iosan green. We'll concentrate on these folds. And this time it's a lot about the portions. I'm going for very kind of gloomy, brooding, sort of stark, wintry look with my army, so smaller portions of highlights, kind of graduating very quickly, leaving larger areas of midtone and shadow, letting that breathe a bit. That's what I'm after. So just concentrating on kind of the upper half of these areas. Wherever there's a fold that will catch a little more brightness. I want to make sure that I'm just keeping my light source in mind, running these highlights right up next to these shadows so I get a really accented look to all these folds in the fabric. Individually pull out a lot of these kind of finer, tighter wrinkles. Take a small amount of paint on my brush, put a little off on my thumb, just drag downwards till I run out of paint, lightly lifting as I get towards the end of that brush stroke. And this little flare out right here will get a bit of a highlight as well. But I'm going to leave this area alone. I may even paint more of a shadow in there. We'll get these highlights in place and just see how it looks. And going in for a third pass, be a little more heavy-handed and just concentrating on those areas that are a little more saturated, kind of dropping a heavier amount of paint up high and then working my brush downwards. And I'll drop an edge highlight right along this fold, along the bottom side as well. But I'll keep this concentrated to the more lifted areas. Wherever one of these folds is kind of sweeping upwards, I want this Iosan green to be kind of graduating up in the same way, just like so. And I'll even give this fold right here, as it's flaring out, being a little more exposed. I can give that a highlight as well. I'll have to come back and give just a little more attention to these larger areas. There are just a couple. I've got this main flap right here, and its smaller yet equally important friend over on the side. I'll move back down to that Gnarls green. I'll sweep a little bit of this in place just to help kind of envelope these blends, smooth things out a little bit. Already I'm getting a little too involved, being a little too tedious, but you can take it or leave it. It's all based on your own personal satisfaction. Not too shabby, getting some stages established. Let's kick things up a notch. I'll take some Iosan green, about an equal amount of Moldy Ochre. A little heavier on the Moldy Ochre side. I'll go through and add just some very small highlights. It's all about that portion control. Think about it like this. As well as the areas that I am painting, pay attention to the areas that are not being painted. Yeah, wrap your mind around that. But just let it breathe a little bit. Pull out these kind of finer points as we've been building these up ever so slightly. You can see at this point I'm covering, the last 10-15% of the surface, making sure that I'm placing these highlights right up on top of these folds, tucking them into the shadow that's above them, so I get a nice kind of arcing fold. It's already sculpted in there, but we're just here to make our own enhancements and embellishments. A little flick of the wrist. And just like everything else, it's going to be done in a few passes, but it goes quickly. You're covering less and less of the surface as you go. Now we're cooking with gas. Grab a little bit of Dark Angel's green from the contrast range. Dilute this with water. Touch it on the paper towel so I've taken most of it off. And just very carefully sweep this across the entire surface, directing the paint into the creases, into the recesses, making sure that it's not pooling up on top of your brighter highlighted areas. It'll work nicely on the handle of the mace as well, just to separate, sink into those recesses, call out that texture a bit. We're just giving it a nice candy coating, just a tinted shell to further diffuse the light, blend all these colors together before we go in and cap off with our final highlights. Final step, I'll be mixing up more of that Moldy Ochre and Iosan green, and then adding a touch of white to deaden things. Nearly equal amounts. As you can see, I'm not too much about portions, I'm just mixing based on sight. You gotta feel it, man. just pull out these final highlights, laying down the smallest, most careful portions, kind of drawing tiny slashes on top of all these folds. Just like so. Hit that corner. You could take this a lot further if you want to and finish things off with a final white, but I will stick with this 4-color progression plus a wash. I think it'll be good enough to be stared at from 3 feet away on the tabletop. With the green complete, I can move along to these cream areas, the areas that are the most far gone. Obviously a bad combination to just shade black shadows on top of a base coat of Vallejo buff, so I'll be pretty much completely covering this area up, but no worries. We'll do a little wet blending to speed things along. So I'll take some Battlefield Brown and Exile Blue, then I have Guncore Brown as the next step up. Just start sweeping this into the shadows. Generally, I want the lower portion of this tabard to be dark as we move upwards, increasing in brightness. So we'll get a little bit of that brown and blue mixture laid in place. Then we'll grab this Guncore Brown, just a nice kind of basic tan. Pull these wrinkles up. And even along here, I'll make a little gradient. Get this all filled in. Don't worry about the icon. You can always paint back over that. I missed a little spot in here. I'll jump up to Vallejo buff while everything is still wet. Take a small, just lay a little dollop down, take a small amount off on my hand. I can mix these colors together right on the figure. If something dries out on me, no problem. Just switch things around. I can blend between the Guncore Brown and Vallejo buff. That all works just fine. And I'll do the same over in this section. Oh yeah, all that buff is the stuff. Get it laid in place. Pull out the, just raise the center up here ever so slightly. Line out this edge. Not too shabby. I think I can brighten this up a little further. Just kind of tighten this area up. The Sequitors take a little more work than the Liberators, but hey, I like the results. As long as I'm enjoying what's happening, things are fine. As we move up, I want to keep this upper tabard, the bib, question mark. Keep this a little brighter. So we'll start it off with the buff, the Guncore Brown mixed together. So wet blend those together, paying mind to these folds. As I move towards the lower angle of these folds, I'll make sure that it's extra tan. And we'll just, since this area is pretty much facing the ground, just throw that Guncore Brown in there as well. A little touch of the buff on top. And maybe bring a little more buff into play, just highlighting these wrinkles once more. not bad. Good kind of wet blended establishing going on. Take some of that brown and blue mixture, lick the brush, sponge it up, kind of using that old place and pull method. Done a separate video on this topic, but you can see me just laying down some paint, licking the brush, sweeping it into place. It's not magic, it's saliva. Take a little bit of this guncore brown, filter it down with a bit of the buff, pull out the edges. My brush is starting to J-hook, but I'll just use that kind of fat side of the J. Use that to edge highlight a little more easily. And move up to pure buff. I'll be applying the same method to the little bit of parchment in the back, but in order to save you time, give you more time to paint, we're just going to focus on one area because everything will be painted the same tones and same technique. So once you see the end result, you'll know how it's done. Now I'm just kind of tending to a bit of glazing. Out loud, I'm going to remind myself this is just tabletop quality. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you want it to look good in the video. But you don't want it to be, disingenuous, you dirty liar. All right, inner conflict aside, I'm going to take a little bit of strong tone from Army Painter. It's been magically produced on my palette. Just a little bit. Sweep some of that off on the thumb. And just like we did with that layer of contrast paint, I'm just using the contrast like a super wash. The Army Painter washes are just fine by me as well. I just kind of use what I have handy. Just filter everything together. I can't help myself. Just make a few small adjustments. Thanks to the wet palette, I can do it all quickly. And once again, just tend to those final highlights. I'll take some Ivory, that lovely Vallejo buff, mix in some titanium white from Liquitex. I can go just a little bit brighter. And we'll just pick out the edges, exercising that oh so important portion control. Very necessary for weight loss as well as good contrast. And just cap everything off. Here and there I may have to lick the brush, sponge some of my paint up. You can see I've been using this large brush the whole time. It's brand new. This is its maiden voyage, so it's really maintaining a nice sharp point. Ordinarily, I may have to switch to a smaller brush size. Next up, to really finish off these robes, I want to go and pick out each of the buttons. Just give them a base coat of black. All these little studs and buttons. All the many spikes of Cygnar's studded leather jacket. Then, once all of those were filled in, just a little touch of Stormhost silver. I'm not going to get hung up on finding every perfect edge and angle. I'm just going to pull out these little dots on top. Hold up 1 second. Your eyes do not deceive you. This is not the same Sequitor. I seem to have picked the one in the whole army that does not have a power crystal at their hip. So, I'm going to switch models here. I have to get 100 of these painted anyways. 20 down, 100 more to go. I have some Arcane blue. I have some Cygnar blue highlight. Combine these and just make kind of a deeper version of this arcane blue. Coat that crystal. Let's give it a base coat. Surrounding area. It's up to you to decide just how far this radius of light will be extending. But I'll go for a faint glow. You can run into some awkward situations OSL wise, but I'm trying to paint basically my whole army has OSL crystals on it, so I'm not going to get too hung up on perfection here. Just make it look cool. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I guess maybe we'll see in the end. But this first color, I'm just establishing the radius. This is about the furthest that this glow is going to reach. I might go a little bit further outside of it when I get to some later stages, but for now I'm just setting up my basic radius. And just remember, as far as the light reaches in one area, you'll have to go and just make sure everything is symmetrical. I do have a video in the catalog on creating OSL and specifically focusing on that if you'd like to check it out. Now we'll drop down in brush sizes a little bit. Use that size 0. Take some arcane blue, just a small touch of white. Line out all of the ridges on this crystal, as well as these leather bands. I've got a little extra belt loop specifically for power crystals. Cool. We'll just keep these edge highlights inside of that radius. Here and there, on some of these more flat surfaces, I can blend a little bit with this color. Again, just trying to be quick about it. Now that I have some of these edge highlights laid in, I'll take that same color, some of these larger spaces on the crystal, just do a little bit of blending right towards the bottom. As long as I don't go too dark on this, then it will still have that lightness and appear to be glowing, but I also do want to add some dimension, a little bit of attention to detail on this crystal. So go and best we can just create a little gradient on these flat sides leading downwards, just like so. Now with that blend established, we'll get a little bit of our Cygnar blue highlight, just a nice basic blue, and smooth out these flat areas where I just highlighted. I'll go in there and smooth out the opposite side. Just deepen it a little bit, but not too much. Now with a little shadow pass complete, bounce back to the highlights. I'll mix up this arcane blue and white mixture even brighter. I'll just tap those edges up once again, making sure I don't cover the previous layer. Even on these edge highlights, I'll bring this color into play, but remember that you want a concentration of light to be building up, so the closer I get to that area, the brighter the highlights. Once again, it's that good old adage about portion control. You know, just keep in mind that the proximity of all these little items versus the intensity of the glow as it gets closer, it's going to intensify. But if you drag this color out across every area that's already been covered, things are going to go a little flatter. You won't have that gradation, and that's very necessary to really get the OSL looking right. Jump back up to that big old brush, and I will be taking from this small pool of turquoise ink, add a little bit of water to that even. Just mix up Very thin ink wash. See, as my thumb is nearly painted, we're getting close to the end. And I'll just use this to cover up the surrounding area. I'll move this a little bit further outside of the radius, ever so slightly. You see, it's going to help to line and define. The ink packs a lot of pigment, helps it to look more vibrant compared to the opaque colors around it. Just don't go too heavy or it'll get all glossy on you. Of course, you can counteract that with a matte varnish, but better to not make mistakes at all. And then to finish everything off, I'll take a small amount of white, and only on the crystal I add these tiny white highlights, pretty much just placing a dot right at these intersections, a little bit at the tip. But yeah, you see, just very, very small touches. And only on the crystal, because I want that to be the brightest object present in this whole situation. If things are a little messy, only a little, after that ink wash, you can go ahead and mix a little bit of that arcane blue and white together. I can pull some of these edge highlights back out. But again, this is somehow a tabletop army by my own definitions, so pull your punches. do what you like, whatever looks best to you. Everybody's got different ideas. And just like so, I think we can call this crystal complete. Wait, let's put a little white dot right at the top, right up here. Excellent. Maybe just one more pass of these dots. Extra crystal. And if I want style points, I could even draw a very faint line. I ran out of paint. I could even draw a very faint line across this facing. Just to add a little bit of that kind of internal texture that gems often have from their compression. But yeah, just like so. And there she stands, firm as a mountain beneath the snow. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for the support. Please let me know any comments. Well, it is a comment section down below, but any questions or concerns, anything at all that you'd like to add, I'm happy to hear from you as people that are supporting this Patreon. And if you're not signed on to the Patreon and you happen to be watching this on YouTube, join the Patreon. And until next week, until that time comes that we must once again create something from nothing and give life to the lifeless, remember, there's a world to paint. So let's get out there, let's get our teeth wet.